Should the best of the best real estate agent be doing all of their own paperwork?
No.
But sometimes they do.
Yeah.
And then when you think about like energy management, if they're spending their time over here doing all this paperwork, they're like, get me out of here. I can't do this because it's not an alignment of what they're great at.
Hey, this is I'm Just Steve. And that's me. I'm Steve. And we are here podcasting again with my friend Dana Roefer.
Hey,
Thank you
great
for
to
coming.
see you. It's been such a long time.
Yeah. So 6 years ago, we did this thing called the Life Band. But I always ask ChatGPT about the person that I'm interviewing first to give me the
Oh no.
So create a bio of Dana Roefer with the search of the internet right in a third grade level, because that's about what I can read at. So this is what it says. Dana Roefer is a writer and businesswoman that helps people find the best products by connecting with friends and experts. She wrote a book called Shop Social, Connecting
Which we're
with
not
people.
going to talk about today.
Okay, and Products and Support, A Best Life, which teaches us how to make better choices. Dana also has multiple jobs that she's worked at, and I'm going to abbreviate, but she started the Grand Rapids Children's Business Fair and encouraged children to explore business ideas. Dana believes that by working together and supporting each other, we can make smarter decisions and lead happier lives.
True.
Pretty good. Yeah.
For those of us that are multi-passionate and have a lot of projects.
Yeah. Chat
it doesn't really make sense of it.
Yeah. I thought I just wanted to, I didn't ask it to edit, right? I was just like, okay, I'm going to go with that. So it's good. So I'm going to just take a couple minutes to introduce why we're here, right?
Yep.
And I'm going to introduce all these papers that are sitting here. This is, just so we're clear, this is one of my prized possessions. I don't know if you know this, and I don't know if other people.
I hope it's legible.
I put them on. They're like, oh, she has great handwriting. So ultimately, you do lots of things, and we'll get into all the other things that you do. But my experience was about 6 years ago. We're trying to pin down the date, but I think early fall 2019. The backstory is I was at a Bible church, and I heard a guest pastor, and he literally for about a minute gave his personal mission statement. And I had never heard of someone so passionate and so clear on who they are, what they believed, and what they were there to do, or what we are here to do in the world. And so I asked around Ada Bible Church, and they said, well, the only person we know of that does work like this is Dana. And I know you had done work with other people within the church. And so I went not knowing. It was an expensive venture, but worth every penny. And we spent, 2 or 3 days? I was 2 days, yep. 2 full days. She's buying me breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean,
you kind of bought it for yourself.
Yeah.
Let's be real about it. It just feels different.
It was in the budget. Yeah, it did. You're right. Oh, man, that's a good thought. But ultimately, the process that we went through, and I'll let you explain the process a little bit, but it basically was a life study of how I perceive it. It was a life study of me, the highs and the lows, what brings me energy, what takes energy away, and what are the skill sets that I have, but also where could I go awry, was part of it, and at the end, then we came up with a personal mission statement with wordsmithing ultimately, which, let me read that. I should just know it in my heart, but I feel it, but I don't. It is a note on my phone, and I literally pill it up at least once a month. I don't know how often you do yours, but and often I've thought, oh, I should redo it, and then I read it, and I'm like, it's still true. Right? Yeah. Lots of change, but so personal mission, I exist to serve people through innovative, charismatic leadership that produces passionate outcomes that invites all into a peace and rest. Mm-hmm. And I get chills when I read it still, because it's like, that's part of the podcast. Like, it's like, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing here with you now and with other people is, and so we made the mission statement. There was lots of highs and lows in those 2 days for me. I don't know if you remember that experience. I know you do this with a lot of people, but you left me in a room, which was very uncomfortable.
I did.
And I cried for like a half an hour.
You needed it.
I did. So I think it was like the early part of the second day or whatever. You said, I'm leaving. You got to forgive yourself for all these hurts and forgive the people that hurt you, or we can't go any further. And I'm like, oh boy.
I don't remember it being that deep. I remember taking all your devices away.
Yeah,
though.
you took all my stuff. Like, you left me with a notebook, and that was it. A notebook and a pen in Ada, Michigan, and just said, and I remember, word for word, you're like, hey, like, Steve, like, I don't think you're prepared to move forward until you forgive the people that have hurt you, and you need to go through a process of forgiveness. I don't think you've ever done that, and without it, you can't go forward. And that was like, that was life-changing for me. I don't know if that was something you've done before.
Literally
or not.
never.
Yeah. And I'm sure you left thinking like, oh man, did I burn my opportunities in the future? But it was what I needed. Right.
Sure.
And you knew that, you felt that calling.
Oh man, people are going to be like, I'm never doing this.
No. Yeah, no. I hope that you have to go into it knowing that your goal is an outcome for growth, right? And so for me, it was like, no, like when you wrote it all down, I was like, yeah, this is like, there's a lot of trauma here. And even though I'm doing counseling, I really I've opened up pieces of my heart in those things, but I have I've not been willing to release any of it, right? I still, we talk about lenses on the podcast, right? Of carrying your lenses and your history with you. And that's what sort of creates your perspective. I believed until you told me no, that they were almost a super cape, that the hurts and the traumas were a thing that I like could use to further myself, right? And grow with and dominate real estate and you name it, right? And it completely changed that trajectory for me. Was like, wait a minute, like this is not a cape I need to wear anymore. I got to get rid of these pieces because I can still carry them with me, but I can't have them have ownership of me. And that's in the tears and in asking for forgiveness from them and from myself, it allowed me to remove a lot of that layer that was holding me back to try to figure out then where was my life going to go after that. So so that was
Thanks
a long-winded, like, I don't know if you realize that. We never really talked about
No, so
all
the funny
of those
thing,
things.
I actually had a friend ask me, I think it was last week, he was asking me about Life Plan, and he said, do you know where everyone is? Do you know the differences made? I was like, not really. You kind of just, it's 2 days, like you said.
It's intense.
We lock in a room for 2 days and just kind of facilitate this process. And I see things, right? I'm connected with people through social, or maybe I'll run into them, but no, I mean, most of the time I don't know. And I just trust that the process does what it needs to do. And I think it hits everyone differently.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So we can go into a lot more about me, but the whole point is like, I'm not the guest, right? You're not interviewing me today. So
I told you I'm much more comfortable in that space though.
Yeah.
So over the course of those 2 days, I get to ask all of the questions and you have to answer them.
Yeah.
So we're flipped here a little bit.
It's great. So can you, let's just talk about this as a grounding for a little bit. Cause I think that it's really a needed thing that people don't even realize is out there.
Yeah.
Right. I was with Lauren. We just threw her podcast up yesterday or Tuesday, and I mentioned it, I think. And she's like, I need to know who that lady is. I need to do that, right? Because she's a serial entrepreneur and trying to figure out herself, right, and her authentic self. So when did you start doing this? What is the background of it? And how do we frame it so that it's like, I'm all gushy about it, right? But how do we frame this process that someone's saying, I thought I need a mission statement. It might be different for each person. I don't know if each person comes with it at a different spot, but can you give us sort of the overview of a life plan?
Yep. Yeah, for
session.
sure.
Yeah.
So I've been facilitating life plans since 2016.
Yeah.
So almost 9 years. April will be 9 years. And it was on the heels of my own life plan. So I think it's important to know, 2016, I'm going to give away my age here. I was 30,
Yeah.
3-year-old, 1-year-old in a good corporate job that provided for my family, gave everything that we needed. And I was like, is this all there is? And I just started asking those questions. So for me, it was very career driven. And I honestly found the life plan process through connecting with people on the internet that I didn't know. In 2016, someone was talking about something. I connected with what they were sharing, and then had a conversation with somebody who said, hey, you really need to look in a life plan. And I'm like, okay, I have no idea what that is or what that means. For me, it was something felt off in my career. And that's what we find from about 80% of the people that go through life plan. You had mentioned at that time in your life, you were with a different brokerage.
Yep.
And that typically is the piece that people call for, right? Because it's like, man, I'm stuck and I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't have the words for it. It can be good and not long-term right.
Mm.
And I think that's hard for us, right? And that was what was really hard for me. And so when I found out about Life Plan and went and did my 2-day life plan, and you'll appreciate this because I'm on the other side of the table now,
Yeah.
but I mean, the most emotional 2 days of my life when I had my life plan facilitated, because this was the first time in my life that I had talked to somebody. I had never been in counseling or anything and this isn't counseling. So I'll get to that and make the distinction. It's not that. But I was not open to talking about myself. I was not open to sharing my life. And and we'll talk about it. Like, you go through all of the things at a high level. We're not going deep to try and fix everything in that moment. But it was incredibly intense. Yeah. And then I've had the privilege since. So the life plan process is, I'm licensed through the Patterson Center, which is out in Colorado. Yeah. So a little bit of background on the process. So Tom Patterson, and this is just a little bit of a history lesson, fascinating. He has since passed. I did get to meet him in 2016, but he has since passed. Business mind, like a process driver, kind of right-hand man of Peter Drucker. For those of you that like business management, all of those things, you will know Peter Drucker's name. Well, Tom Patterson was on the side of him. And why he did strategic operating processes for companies, right? Like, where are we going? How are we going to get there? Do we have the right people? All of those different pieces. Well, he was working with an executive, and the executive came to him and said, Tom, I'm so grateful for what you've done for our company. We're like cruising. We're doing so well. The company is just gangbusters. We're growing all the time. He said, but my life is a mess. Mm-hmm. And he challenged him. He challenged Tom. He said, can you help me figure out the rest of my life? Because we can very quickly get out of balance of like, hey, the career's cruising, but like my family's a mess. Or, things are going good with the family and they're going good with my career, but personally, I'm unhealthy. I feel like garbage, right? And there's all these different factors. Community comes into that too. And so when Tom Patterson created this process, he was really intentional about like, it's all of those things. And you have to think about all of them because that's how you can fully be at your best. So that is the privilege that I have of taking people through a 2-day process that helps them to outline. And we're truly just looking for clarity along the way. Yeah.
Just asking the right questions to help them process like where they're at and then where they could be going.
Yep.
But it's not, so I had Rob Elliott. I don't know if you know Rob Elliott at all.
I don't know.
You should. I'll introduce you. Rob owns Pandora Consulting, and they have a pretty amazing, basically, I'm going to dumb it down and he'll probably hate me for it, but the personality profiling study that is their own. They created the study, really high end. And it's not just like, your DISC or your Enneagram. It's way more in depth, and then a lot of like intelligence side of things. Anyways, so it's not that, right? And I just want to clarify, because I think there's a number of business coaches and business personal business coaches or counselors that will go through processes that's not this, right? I've had counselors, I've done all the personality profiling. I didn't find this to like, it was a different process for people. So I want to just make sure if anybody is listening trying to say, oh, I did that. It's like, no, I don't know of this, right?
I had I appreciate that you brought that up. I had a client come to me after, so we were after day 2, and he actually shared with me the outputs from multiple tests that he had done. And he said, oh my gosh, I get it now. Like they all make sense now.
Now there's you're creating a track from that, right? It's like, oh, I am this personality, which I appreciate and understand. And these are my drivers. But like based on that, then this is my history. And this is then how do I place all of those things into a plan, right?
Yep.
Ultimately.
Yep.
So the 2-day process, give me the overview of the 2-day process for people.
Yeah, so we spend 2 days together. I have a studio at my home, and I'm not the only life plan facilitator. I mean, there are probably hundreds around the country now, and we all utilize this process that Tom Patterson has created. And so we really have to start with, where are we right now? Right. And we have a tool that we go through in totality. There's probably 17 tools that we go through in your big pieces of paper. Maybe each one of them is a tool or multiple tools built into that chart.
That framework.
Into that framework. But if you don't know where you are today, how are you going to see where you're going? So we start with that of just like, where are we? What's going well? What's not going well? What am I confused about? What's missing in my life? And you just kind of dump it. It's just there's power in putting words to things. And you already mentioned wordsmithing. We do a lot of that because, and I've had people say this often too, is I'm not surprised by the outcomes of my life plan. It's my life, but now I have the words to talk about it.
Yes.
Right? And you have that. So as far as the process, where are we today? How did we get here? So in order to determine how we got here, we've got to look back and look over the course of a lifetime and say, how did we get here? And then we start gaining perspective on, what am I driven by? What are my talents? What does my heart say? Where do I most naturally fit? And then, and only then, after we've gained perspective for a day and a half, can we then pull it to any sort of plan, right? To say, okay, if this is true about me, which I believe that it is, and if this is where I want to go in the future over the course of however many years I determine, to start backing it back up again of what do I need to start doing now in order to focus on that outcome in the future. And I always say to people, it's a direction, not a destination, right? Because I think so often we want a destination.
Yeah, we want an answer, right? Like, oh, I'm going to pay to have a life plan, and you're going to tell me if my job is a good fit for me or not, right? And it's
that is true. There's an element of that is true of the today, right? Of like, am I in the right place or am I not? And some people figure out it could be validating or it could be not. But then what is that direction that I'm heading, and how do I react to all these different things that are happening? Because life changes, circumstances change, people change, careers change, all of that. But what remains true is you in who you are and what that means, and then where you want to be headed towards. And then we can make decisions based on that.
Right. Yeah. It's, I mean, that process of looking back, I think, obviously the podcast, a lot of the conversations are around the lenses that we wear, right? And the analogy that I use often of, just because I've always had glasses and never have had contacts. But the idea of, okay, everybody has their own set of glasses on and lenses they look through. And so that process of that first day of really determining these life events that equal your lenses, I just thought of that as we were going through that study together of like, oh, this thing that happened, my mom's abuse or my father-in-law's death, right? Each of these moments in life then reflect then how I see the world, right? Because they are just key moments. And then there was and I brought up two negatives, but there was multiple positives. Like, okay, you were at your best. Like, what was, when you sold 250 homes and you had, 25 employees, what was that, right?
Yep.
What was
going on?
What was going on that you felt successful in it and that you growth, and what was the high of that? And then what was the low of that, right?
Yep.
I think there was a lot of high-low conversations. But that framework and that lens then allowed for then the second day ultimately to then start moving forward, right? Was like, okay, here, which is why you made me sit in it for a minute, because we couldn't get to the next step of life without releasing the first step of life, ultimately for me. So do you find that most people are coming because they want the process of that, or was the mission statement just an unusual thing for me?
I think
or do most people do them
stick out to different people.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And again, everybody needs something different. And I think that's what's the beauty of this, is it hits people in different places. So for you, having that, like, why I exist statement, right? I exist in order to do these things. And if I continue to do that, that is like,
if I can live into this statement that I read, at my highest and best, then everything else will do well, right? It's when I'm trying to do all the other stuff, if I'm not charismatic and not leading people and not growing, it's like, oh, okay, well, no wonder you're not happy, right? And so for me, the mission statement was probably the most critical. Like, the process was critical, but now 6 years later, these sit on a table in our basement, and I know right where they were, right? And I will pull them out every once in a while. This stack goes with my vision boards. Like, it's like, these are the things that I hold like critical for my life, of like, okay, here's the things. But so each person then has a different outcome ultimately.
Right.
Like, some need to know the process, and some want the statement. Do you define it based on what that person says what they're looking for? Like, so when I said I want a mission statement, you do a mission statement no matter what, that's part of that 17 steps. It's like, we're going to work through it. The outcome is going to be this. Then you have to decide which of those pieces fit for you.
Me as the facilitator?
The person.
Or for the person.
Yeah,
for sure. I think, for me, right, one of the things that stood out in my life plan, the strongest, and gave me so much clarity, was going through core values. So we do a process, and we think about core values like, well, we know that. We know what we value, but we go around and around and around. It's like, is it this or is it that? And is it this word or is it that word? And does this word actually fit into that word, and all these different categories? So for me, I have 4 different core values: purpose, efficiency, independence, and growth.
There you go.
I got it. And growth, but constantly, because the way that core values can come to life is the times, for me at least, when I'm frustrated with things, I'm like, oh, of course it's rubbing against, like, I feel like I'm not growing right now, and that's a problem. And I want to make sure that I'm doing that. And so again, like, that's the beauty in the process, is it does hit people with what they need at that time. And you really don't know what is going to come of it. And so that part is really cool.
I need to pull up my study here in a minute to really see what the core values were, because I don't remember that.
Oh,
right?
See, but that's the thing.
See, and that's, so each person pulls into what's important. So for you, it's not necessarily the mission statement that you go back to all the time. It is ultimately your core values.
Yeah, and other elements as well. I think that there are other elements.
They just create grounding for each individual that goes through the study.
Having the words creates clarity. And to go back, I think you had asked, and I do want to reiterate this, because I think for us as humans, the things that we can recognize, like, someone's not just going to call me and say, hey, I'd really like to know myself better.
Yeah.
No one calls me because they want to know themselves better.
True.
They call me because my job isn't going very well right now, and I feel dead inside, or I am bored, or I just can't do it anymore, right? Like, I get to this breaking point of asking these questions of, like, where do I go from here? Now, you and I know along the way, it's going to be like, no.
Yeah.
Who are you? What does that mean?
Right.
How did we get here? And then do we eventually get to a career filter? Absolutely. And that's what they thought they came for.
Yeah.
They got those answers and they got that clarity, but it's not just that. I think it's so much more than that because we want to know what informs or is going to continue to inform our future.
Yeah. Mine, integrity, wastefulness, and educated.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So integrity, doing what you say you'll do, is the specific. Wastefulness.
So probably when you come in contact with people that do not
Yeah.
hold high integrity, you're like, come on.
Yeah. Do what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why are we not?
Yeah. Wastefulness. So time, calm, peace, and order.
Yeah.
And then education, ignorance, openness, and perspective.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Those were
now
my
here you are having those
3.
conversations with.
And it's great. Yeah. It's great. We can close this up, and I want to talk about your work with children and entrepreneurship and all the other amazing things that you do. But I think of this for the entrepreneur because that's who I was. But I think entrepreneur as the word, people believe that you're someone that's starting businesses, you're growing your own thing, you're out there in the world. And I mean, when you did this, you were working at a big corporation, but I don't think the entrepreneur spirit wasn't part of you, right? Like, so if you're working for someone and we say entrepreneur, that doesn't not mean you, right? It's someone that wants to start and grow and build stuff, right? Is how I think of an entrepreneur. And that can be done in an ability within a company, or that can be you individually, you name it, right?
Right.
So I think of this as that person that wants to then know where they've been and where they're going, so that they can then have a foundation to then make choices.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And not just career. I mean, some of this is life choices, obviously, but a lot of this is focused on career, I think, ultimately. But so those that are listening or that have been listening that are in that spot where it's like, am I in the right place? Right. And that doesn't mean, do I quit the place I'm in? It just means, am I using my skills and my, core values the way that I want to? And do I know how even to communicate that? And I think the communication side is where it helped me, but I think it probably helps most in like that they don't have the words, they don't have the ability to sort of stand up for themselves in an educated way, right? One of my core words, like they fight against. I've had lots of employees. They fight against what they're doing, but they don't know why they're fighting, right? Like, why am I upset? Why don't I like this? Why am I pushing for change? But they don't have the verbiage of what it is emotionally that they're feeling. Correct. Is that what you sense from your people that you're working with?
But when you are empowered and you do have those words, on the other side, it brings so much clarity. I mean, for an example, if you think about roles, if you think about roles in a career, we're all wired differently, right? And so we have different ways of working. And if you can advocate for yourself because kind of like, this is my sweet spot, your ability to grow, because then other people can be looking out for that for you too. Because you can communicate to them like, hey, if I have the opportunity to work on a project like this or to create something along these lines, well, they can help you too. I think just most people don't have those words. I want to also go back to talents. So you talked about talents, and we spend quite a lot of time in Life Plan process trying to identify talents. One of the things that is super alarming to me is that what is it? So most people do not know what their talents are.
Okay.
And around 80% do not have a full talent allocation in their work.
Interesting.
And when that happens, disengagement is highly likely.
Yeah.
Because you're basically like, I'm not doing the things I was made to do. Right? Like if you can do work effortlessly, because it's connected to the skills that you have, to the talents that you have, to the heart that you have, your engagement in whatever you're doing skyrockets because you don't have to, you're not overcoming constantly, right? So you think about those people that you're like, man, they are on and whatever they do turns to gold. Well, probably they're like really well connected with what they do. I think, I'll put this in a real estate term. Like realtors oftentimes are really good relationship builders. They're in sales. But I'll ask you this. Should the best of the best real estate agent be doing all of their own paperwork? No. But sometimes they do.
Yeah.
And then when you think about like energy management, if they're spending their time over here doing all this paperwork, they're like, get me out of here. I can't do this because it's not in alignment of what they're great at.
Yeah, I even the podcast for me is such an outlet for the mission statement, right? And podcast is on our sheet. I didn't realize this until I looked down right now. So Paul, 6 years ago, I knew I was going to hang out with you, I guess. What does yellow mean? Is yellow a good thing?
Yellow means that, you were clearly thinking about it and you were already kind of starting to put wanting to and starting to put things into action at that time.
Look at that, Paul. 6 years, buddy. It's right here.
Yeah.
Right on my life dashboard.
Is that a 2 or 3? What is that?
I think it's a 5. We go 1 through 7.
Okay. Yeah. For strategy. What did we put down there then? Bi-weekly podcast. Oh, that might have been listening.
Bi-weekly podcast,
that
Paul.
might have been listening to podcasts for growth. Was it listening?
No, because I'm not a listener.
Oh,
no,
okay.
So
okay.
I'm sure it was creating. That's awesome. Okay.
That's so funny.
Isn't that great? It's amazing.
It is.
So yeah, I had a question and then I got sidetracked.
It is so really funny for me because I look back at my own life plan a lot. And I've probably at this time over the course of 9 years, maybe facilitated 100 life plans, like quite a lot, right? Yeah. And I don't know the details. I don't remember all of those things, but just trusting in those couple of days that it continues to
the things bubble out that really are what you want to do.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Most people are thinking about these things.
Yeah.
Right? But we either don't give ourselves permission to put them out in the world or we're afraid or I don't know. What's everybody going to think? Am I capable? Like we have all of these different risks that we also need to identify. So it's really fun to see that come to life.
Well, and also,
now here you are.
Yeah. It stands for also like timing isn't like, I always I use the vision board as that example, but this would be a prime example too, is like, not always is it something that even it's in the subconscious, I want to do a podcast, right? And I didn't even have that. I didn't realize that was even on here until I literally just looked down now.
Yeah.
And so that's 6 years of in the back of my head, someday maybe I'll do a podcast, right? And that this would be, my life strategy. How do I get there? It's number 5 on my thing. Daily exercise, daily quiet time, commitment to weekly dating, no phone between the hours of, biweekly conversations, completing commercial line.
This is a 2-piece of paper, so you're only getting
there's more, but it's what's interesting is this was a to-do list for me 6 years ago of a healthy me, and it took me 6 years to get here.
100%.
But
it does not happen.
It doesn't happen, right?
Quickly.
Because I wasn't healthy for years, even after I had words and process and procedure. It came to a place where I walked in here and was on a podcast with Megan and Paul was hanging out and Wally. That I was like, I need to be here. This is where I'm created to be.
Yep. It's a direction. It's not.
But 6 years ago, I had that written down. That's awesome. And I think that sometimes in our worlds, we try to push things too fast.
Yeah.
Right? That hey, okay, I got to get to number 5 because that's on my list. And it would have never been right, right? Ultimately. And I would have not been in a place to have these heartfelt conversations. Ultimately to get that out. But where I was communicating, we were talking about real estate agents doing the right thing for them. And I was with a real estate coach that was on the podcast on Tuesday, and she was saying, hey, it's clear that you love this. And I said, yeah, I love it. And I just And she said, I can see that you're excited about real estate again. I don't think you've been excited for a long time. And I'm like, well, that's true. Maybe that's why I haven't gotten as many phone calls as I should, that people will read that, right? People read that. And I said, but I am excited about real estate again because I have the number 5 outlet, right?
Yeah.
Like that, like the real estate thing allows me the money, time, and energy and the relationships to do the podcasting. But it's because I'm aligned with those 8 things in my life strategy plan right now, where it's like, because I was with my counselor yesterday, and he's like, hey, you're killing it right now. What are the things that are working? And I honestly went through this list without having it in front of me.
Yeah.
So then, I think I'm so excited right now.
Yeah.
If you can't tell, well, I'm all giddy right now.
That's the thing. Like, that's the thing about timing. And for me, this is a baked in a faith-based trust too, of just like the Creator's plan for our lives and who he's made us to be. And that doesn't mean that someone needs to be faith-based to go through the life plan process. I mean, I've had people that aren't, but I do think that there is something about knowing that, and it is how you build the blocks around it. I mean, I remember having a conversation with somebody one time and this was with a young person, because I love having these conversations with young people, because man, if they can figure it out and not waste a decade in the wrong role or in the wrong wrong headspace, like, please, the earlier we can do it, the better.
So you do these with teens? Or
I don't do the full life plan process
do they have
with
a child
teens.
version or a younger
No,
version?
I mean, it's very, this is
still
very
trying
intense.
to figure out their space.
Yeah,
right?
and this is very intense. But there are pieces that we can ask and just get the mind going, right? Yeah. So they can start thinking about, like, maybe I need to know. I mean, a question that I would ask high schoolers. You've got a couple.
Yes.
How many high schoolers right now? 3?
I have 2 right now.
2 high schoolers. Yeah. So good questions with them could be something like, hey, what's your favorite class? And what is your least favorite class, and why? Right? Because I think they could see, like, hey, I am gifted in writing. I am not gifted in math. Like, but they can start seeing this. And one of the things that I love sharing with young people is that traditional schooling, is the only time you have to be good at everything. It's the only place where you are expected to be top of the line in all of the things, because that is not the reality in the real world.
Right.
Like, at all.
Yeah.
And so if they can understand that, and they can have that mindset going into it of, like, you know what, I don't want to call it a game, because I don't want to be, like, disrespectful, but it's true. Like, this is the game that I'm in right now. Yeah. And I need to figure out how to work within this system, because that's what they're doing. So the more that we can help them to have those conversations, the better. So one of the conversations I was having with the young person is she was getting ready to apply for colleges, and she was thinking down the lines of law, and she wanted to go to law school. And so she was very aligned. She loved the foundations and basics of law. She also, if she had to have another question, if you had a perfect day, how would you spend your time? If you got to decide, teenager, how you spent an entire day on your own, what would you do? How would you spend your time? Well, you know what she would do? She would get up, she would paint by herself for 3 hours. She would then go for a hike. She would spend time with friends in the afternoon. And my question to her was, cool, great. I love that you're passionate about law and you want to go down that road. What are you going to do, and how do you need to supplement this creative outlet that is so important to you?
Yeah.
Because that work, though there is some creativity within it, it's not fully creative. And so you do find those outlets to bring that in, because if you're without it, that's a whole part of you that is not coming to light in the world.
You're denying that piece of you, right? And I have felt that multiple times, and even in the last couple months, where I've done some things where I was like, oh, wow, how long have I denied that piece of who I am? Because I think I need to do these things to be successful, or I need to do these things because of whatever reason. So we got chickens, not as many as Paul. Paul's breeding like hundreds of them over there. But we got chickens, and I had to build out a chicken coop on the bottom of our barn. And like, I spent probably a good week, like real physical labor, right? And I felt so good at the end. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is creative. And I'm, taking boards, and like, um, it was a great project because Ellen Grace doesn't know anything about construction
Yeah.
or care. She just like show me the final product.
Yeah.
So it was really like a really cool project because I was like, oh, I can just hack this together and
Yeah.
paint it, and no one will know if it's good or bad. It'll just look cute.
It's done.
And it's done, and
So-
it looks great, right? So there's
I don't think the
efficiency.
chickens
There's no,
care.
yeah, they don't care. They love it. It's a great thing. It's like the Taj Mahal. But that was such an outlet for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
right? And then I could do that for a couple hours, and then I could do the hard work of the paperwork and real
Yeah.
estate, or the follow up, you name it, right?
Yep.
This too, right? I have a very full day today. But having this as an outlet, the podcast and the creative space around the conversation with you, and just like honestly, just the quiet of just I can't do anything but this
Yeah.
is really good. But I was already bringing furniture to get a staged house ready.
Yeah.
Like it was like, oh wow, okay, like because of the like not denying those pieces of me
Right.
that are an outlet I need, then I can do the job really, really well.
Yep.
Where maybe 6 months or a year ago, I was like, do I even want this job anymore? Like, is this really for me? What should I do? Like, should I
Yeah.
apply? Like, what should I?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how, but that was in that denial of like, no, I have way too much going on. I can't do a chicken coop or a
Yeah.
podcast or whatever because that'll take away energy.
Yeah. But
So,
you decide
but yeah,
how you spend your time.
yeah,
Right. And I
Yeah.
think that's ultimately what it is. It's putting the power, the words, the commitment and discipline into the hands of the individual to say, this is who I am. This is what I want. And we're constantly trying to figure it out over time. Right.
Yeah.
You may be in a good place for a few years and then something else will change and you'll have to redirect. Right. And you're constantly like trying to redirect. But I do think that having that not destination, but having that direction is so helpful because you can then reflect like, what am I missing? And why am I not excited about this? And do I need something that will bring a little bit more energy and I can be excited about doing it? I think that's, super important.
It's back to having a foundation to build off
Right.
of, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, I can build a career and a life that I want.
Yeah.
If I have a foundation. If I don't, then I'm just at the whims,
Right.
Kind of a thing. So, thank you for explaining that, and I hope that anybody that is listening reaches out, and they can reach out to me or they can message you as well because we'll connect them on social media. But I think this is critical work, and thank you for doing that work.
Yeah,
with
thank you for
100+
sharing with
people,
me.
'cause
It's
this
so
is-
fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna spend some extra time over the next week really reading it again. I think now and really focusing on it. But
It's just amazing to me that you don't actually have to study it.
Yeah.
Because you will naturally be pulled towards where you said you wanted to be.
Right. Yeah, but if I
Right.
had read this, maybe Paul and I could have hung out like 8 months ago or a year, right, Paul? Like maybe I would have sought out Paul a little faster, but timing is always
it's okay.
right.
Timing,
This is where it needed to be, right?
right.
Kind of a thing for me at the moment I needed it, so it's great.
Yeah.
But you have gone through lots of transitions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you then take this work that you did 9 years ago, knowing it, teaching it, everything, and then go from that, quitting the corporate job, right? But then you do a lot of things, right? And so I'd love to understand then, we have this foundation that you've created for yourself. You have what's healthy and what's not.
Yeah.
How does someone take that based on your experience and transition through different life, like writing a book where you're like, well, we're not going to talk about the book. So it's like not something that's critical or important to you anymore, right? Or it was at the time, but maybe not right now. We, had blogs, you did podcasting. I don't know if you're still doing the podcast or not.
Not currently.
And so we have how do you use the life plan to stop doing stuff when you thought it was healthy for you?
Yep.
Restart new things.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're in a transition period of a new experience coming up, which you're welcome to talk about that if you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Help me and help the audience sort of see, like, you don't have to get stuck. You have this information, and at different times in the 9 years, you're all in on doing life planning with people.
Yep.
And then it's like, nope, I'm going to probably only can handle 10 of those this year.
Yep.
Right. Or whatever that might be. So
yeah, that's a great question. And I appreciate the opportunity to think through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 9 years ago, yes, I was in a corporate job. And I did my life plan in April. I ended up leaving that job in July. So 3 months later, it kind of gave me the ability. One of the things that was a risk factor for me is that I have always, well, not always, Matt and I go back and forth, but I, at that point, was the breadwinner for our family, working full time, and he was home with our boys.
Yeah.
Because it was important for us to always have like a connection point with us and a lot of extra time.
And 2 boys?
With us. 2 boys. Yeah.
How old?
10
now?
and 12
Okay.
now, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And so when I left that job, so I was doing life plan facilitation. This has never been full-time for me. It's always been like, I see it as from a facilitation standpoint, it's a gift. It's one of my gifts. And it's such a valuable process that I believe in. But it's a lot.
I was
it's
gonna say,
a lot.
I don't know how you would emotionally handle someone like me for 2 days and not need like 2 months off.
I had another facilitator and she was doing like high volume life plans where sometimes of the year she was doing 2 a week. Yeah. So she would do like a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And it is like, you're locked in.
Yeah, you're living their life.
You are locked in, and it's a lot. So, I've always done that kind of part-time. We had started a school.
Yeah.
So Matt and I in 2016 started Journey Academy, which is a non-traditional school for kids, because there's always been this piece, like I mentioned earlier, like, man, if we could get kids to start thinking some of these ideas earlier, the better. And that would be amazing. Same time, we also started the Grand Rapids Children's Business Fair. So it's an ADA every year where kids can come and build a business, make their own product and sell it.
Is the school still operating?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a whole part of my story. So that was 2016. In 2021, we actually left the school.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't a great fit, wasn't a great for one of my kids, and which is crazy. It's still, I would highly recommend for everyone. We have a great relationship with the people that run it today. Mm-hmm. And we've passed it off. It's nonprofit, right? So we passed it off to a board of directors and new leadership. It's right out in Ada. We see them all the time. Yeah. But that wasn't easy. you know, when you go through a place of like pouring your heart and soul into something and then deciding to like, hey, this isn't really the place for us anymore. And we're going to continue to move on.
How did that, can you help people understand the alignment in the conversations around that, right?
Yeah.
Because that is a critical piece, I think, that people get stuck on. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. That's me. That people get stuck on in this idea of, okay, I've put 5 years in, I've put
tons
7
of money,
years in,
tons of
right?
energy.
But it doesn't align anymore. But how do I change? How do I adjust? Right? Like, how did that process for Journey Academy happen?
Yeah.
For you guys?
Yeah, there were internal factors of us making that decision,
right.
And there were external factors that were not within our decision. So I think whenever you start something, so if we talk about entrepreneurship and you talk about creation, there are always risks associated with that, whether it's going to be your thing forever and for always or whether it's not. Yeah. And so we just had to hold it loosely and say, like, we knew that we were being asked or being called to be the ones that start, right? Like, we knew that. And so we're like, okay, we're the ones, like, we're going to do it. We're going to do the work. And Matt was he did so much and just kind of put his heart and soul, and we both did. We worked on it together. But we were also like, you have to hold loosely because it doesn't always turn out in the way that you think it is. And I don't know that I ever had a vision of us being like 20 years in and continuing to run a small private school. I don't know, right? I didn't know at the time. And so it changed, and we just kind of held it loosely and said, okay, then what's next? And so I had learned a lot about my own self. Obviously, we had created quite a lot. The business fair at that time was only once a year. So it's it's not a ton of work, right? It's not like a full-time job. Right. I had done some consulting. So I was doing more kind of back in the corporate consulting world for like a day-to-day work. And I've been doing that since. I think this question about I think people are scared sometimes to leave. And I understand why, because there's the comfort of what you know to be true. But I've never been comfortable in comfort places.
Chaos is a better spot for you to be in?
I don't think it's chaos. I don't want to say chaos. I think I am so driven. Agent. And I am so driven to be aligned with where am I supposed to be and where is the Lord guiding me and how do I make sure that I'm being faithful to that. And to be faithful to that doesn't mean that you just forever, I don't want to say coast, but like forever stay in the same thing. And so you have to be open to those opportunities. And along the way, I felt like I had a story to tell. And so I wrote a book and I did a podcast for a time until I ran out of time. And I was just like, it wasn't a priority anymore. In that season, we've gone through a really, really difficult health journey with my mom's health, and we're still in it pretty actively. And so it's all choices, right? And it's all part of your life where you're just looking at it and going, okay, where do I need to optimize? What's working? What's not? What's working? What's missing? What's confusing, right? Like we're back to where we started from. And I continually do that as a process. And so, I am really excited. Right now I'm moving into a new role with a nonprofit, a kind of global nonprofit, where I'm going to be able to continue to help teens to understand who they are, what that means in the world, kind of through a lens of creation and entrepreneurship. And it just all I feel like you had to pick a word for 2025. Alignment is my word. And it just feels like it's all happening. So I'm really excited.
But your experience allows for that alignment to happen 100%. Now, right? Like you started the school, you've done the business career, you've coached and developed your own systems and processes. Right. So it allows for that opportunity to show up in your world because 100%. You have gone through all the other things. Yeah. Right? And
you're building relationships along the way.
Yeah.
So I will I'm fortunate enough to lead Faith-Driven Entrepreneur for teens. And that's where I'm headed in the next couple of weeks. Okay. But Faith-Driven Entrepreneur and Faith-Driven Investor are organizations that have been around for a handful of years to just encourage entrepreneurs, encourage investors to continue to be driven by their faith and decisions that they make. And I'm like, yes. It just is so obvious. But those are relationships that I started building in 2020 and have just kind of loosely been connected with the team. And you never know when all of a sudden it's like, hey, we need someone. And I guess I'm that person, and you just raise your hand and you're like, I feel like the time is right. And this is where we need to be going now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was with another guest and they said the same thing. Hey, I am having conversations with this organization. I never thought I would, but all the things line up to this might be a really amazing opportunity for me. Right. And so how you mentioned, and I wrote it down here, holding loosely.
Yeah.
That's not something I hear often. Right.
Yeah.
In business or it's like I'm just gonna grind until I win, right? Or again, I'm gonna stay here because it's stable and comfortable for me. And there's nothing wrong with I always say, like, there's nothing wrong with that if that aligns with who you are, right? If you're I think of my past father-in-law that passed away. He owned a huge insurance company, and that was one of my needed to forgive him for dying on me things. He was so aligned with what he was doing, and people would say, like, well, you have all this business experience. Why don't you go work for this, run this nonprofit now? Or why wouldn't you go on the mission field? And he said, my mission field is here at the office. Yeah. I am called to know each of my 100 employees and what is their life and how can I help them? And it was like, oh, wow. Okay. So it doesn't mean I need a new job. I need a new career 100%. When you're aligned within who you are and what you're doing. Right. I mean, he's like, I don't need to go out in the mission field. My job is to write a check so someone else can. Yep. I am the person that can earn money to allow someone else to do the work. Right. And I was like, okay, like you're fully aware and aligned in who you are and what you're here to do. But holding loosely is a different not that he didn't, right? He would go in and out of stuff all the time and help lots of organizations on the nonprofit board side. But help me understand that thought process that you have of you never know where the next opportunity is going to lie. And so to get like, how do you stay very focused, like at the school, but actually hold it loosely? Like that's a two different thing. In my brain, I'm trying to understand that, right? It's like, okay, if I hold this thing loosely, am I then giving it energy to actually do well?
Yeah.
And how do you? Because I think I have another thing like silent quitting, which I think like a lot of people have done over the years. COVID has allowed that when they're working from home, right? But I think that really goes back to the life planning side of the equation, that they aren't aligned, and they're just going to silently just engage, right?
Yep.
So how do I not silently, like how do I fully engage but also hold loose? Those are two different.
Yeah.
How do I marry those?
Yeah. So I'll explain this in two different scenarios, I think, because in my mind, they're different things. When I think of holding loosely, it is the concept of surrender. And for me, this is 100% because of my faith in Jesus. Like, it is like, okay, God, my life is not my life. It's your life. How do you want to use it? How do you want to use me? How can I reach people? How can I connect with people? How can I utilize the things that you've given me in order to serve others? And hindsight is 2020 on some of the things that we started and we did and we were connected with. I think it's been various moments. So Journey's a good example. I would say for me, I held it loosely. It was a lot easier for me to kind of disengage a bit because it, for me, was not like my full-time job. Right. Whereas for Matt, it was. Matt's my husband. Mm-hmm. In November, we have been married for 17 years.
Congratulations.
And so it was his full-time thing. So for me, the role that I played there was operational, it was fundraising, it was all of the detail type stuff. I was really kind of like doing the operations of it. We had other people that could step into some of those roles. So it was easier for me to kind of disengage, not from like a mental, but I could, mm-hmm. right? Because we'd built it, we had employees, we were able to kind of like let it go. I think if I think about like right now, because any decision in my life now, I've just learned too much over the last, 9 years since I've been doing this. Any opportunity that I take has got to be really closely aligned. Mm. And I think that you can have something that's really good, but it might not be a perfect alignment. And so though it's still really good, I can be fully engaged in what I'm doing in that moment still. Because I do recognize it's not a disengagement.
Still joy. You still find joy.
I'm still connected to my talents. I'm working with great people. There's a lot of things that are happening that are really, really great. It's just a matter of like, man, this new thing came up. And so I'm in the place where again, holding loosely of where I go. And so I'm in the mindset of I can take that opportunity. I can move into that opportunity. Doesn't mean that the current thing isn't great because the current thing can be great. And so I think that the disengagement, the silent quitting, most of the time it comes because of a misalignment. Something is misaligned. And this is why 80% of the people that call me for a life plan are disengaged in their work. Like, I just don't know how long I can do this for anymore. Mm-hmm. And I had to have a really hard conversation with somebody because it is an investment. You know this. Yeah. Like, life plan is an investment. This is not a like, oh, I'm going to call and give a couple hundred. No.
No, this
like,
is a couple thousand.
More than a couple thousand.
Yeah.
And so it is a commitment, and it's a commitment and an investment in you. But I remember having a really hard conversation with somebody where he had been admittedly totally disengaged from his work for a decade, 10 years. And if you're working, 40, 50 hours a week, that's 60% of your time. And think about how that is then you're getting home from work, you're exhausted because nothing is engaging, nothing's interesting. So you're not showing up great for your family. You're not showing up great for yourself because you're so tired. So you're not getting up to the gym in the morning or whatever, like all those things. And so I finally decided to have this frank conversation with him, not because I wanted to say, I don't care. You know, I mean, you asked me yesterday, you're like, do you have a website? I'm like, no, not really. No, maybe I should.
Like, how do I promote you? I don't really want to be promoted, but you can get my name out, right?
Because I'm also I mean, I love doing it, you know, but if I did like one a quarter or every, 6 a year, I'm good. Like we're good. Now, if more people need it, I'm happy to do that. But it's not really something that I'm out there selling. So, but 10 years, 10 years. Oh my gosh. I mean, I just told you about my last 9 since we started my life. Like a lot has happened.
Yeah. I mean, that just breaks your soul, right?
It breaks my heart.
Yeah. That someone
like you are
would
worth it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I want people to know. Like you are worth the investment. And I understand like money is hard and finances are hard and all these things can be hard, but like 10 years of kind of misery, like if you can find a way out and you can make your pivot on your own, please, like just do it. Like, please do it.
Yeah. And I think it's hard, right? Where you're like, oh, this is comfortable, so I'm just going to stay with it, even though I don't like it.
Pays my bills. Yeah. It's providing for my family, which that's really important.
Right.
Like, don't get me wrong. That's really important. But I do feel, and I believe it's so true, that you can get closer to an alignment and that you can do work that is fulfilling and is better connected to who you are.
So help me understand the process in which you stay loose based on faith, right? In this idea of that you just communicated, that based on your belief in Jesus Christ and your faith background, that allows you to stay more fluid, right? Or more loose. Is that a weekly? How do you bring that out in yourself to say, is that prayer? Is that meditation? What is the practice in which you have put in place to allow to be able to hear?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm in a men's book club, which I don't like. They just picked a book that's this big, Dana. Like, Paul, like they should know better, right? And like the picture on the front looked good, and they're like, "Hey, let's do this one." And then I ordered it from Amazon, and I got. I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah, you really can't see how big they are on Amazon.
This is men's book club. Like this is not the Oprah book club.
That's where you got to get the audio. You're like audio book, please.
Yeah. But we were talking about what was
habits.
The habits, but we were really talking about calling.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because only a couple are believers, and we're all in different places of that belief. And mine has come and gone. My belief is there, but my relationship has come and gone over COVID, right?
Sure.
For I think a lot of people, it's the same. So we're talking about callings, and I said, like I felt called in these situations in my life, going and doing disaster relief work, and you name it, right? And they're like, I have never felt that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about, Steve. And I think that's what you're sort of talking a little bit about. Okay, here's this next opportunity to work for this nonprofit. If I were to communicate your words, I would think you would say, I'm feeling called to that now as the next phase of opportunity in my life. But how would someone even get to a place where they understand that they are being called? Like, do you have a practice?
Yeah.
How would you help somebody go through that?
That's hard. These are hard. These are hard things to work through, right?
Yeah.
And I recognize that anything faith-based is challenging because it's rooted in faith.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we're rooted in faith, and that is a hard thing to define.
Believing something that you can't tangibly see,
it's
right?
a hard thing to define. So my story, I came to faith later. So high school, I grew up in West Michigan, but really wasn't connected to the church. And so when it became real for me, it became super real for me, like very real. And I was like, okay, if this is real, then what? And this is just my personality too, right? Very driven, very wanting to figure out purpose and meaning, all of that. And so I've really leaned in and really leaned into faith. From a practice standpoint, I don't have like 3 bullets. Here's all the things that worked for me. It just doesn't work that way in my mind. I value quiet a lot. I value thought a lot, and that's hard. But I also think of how different that is from our culture in 2025. So if I can go for a walk for for an hour, even if I'm listening to music, like that is moment that I just feel like there is download into my mind. And so it's not because I'm bringing up all of these questions. I always joke, I have a route that I like at Seedman Park because it's not far from us out in Ada. And, it's like a 3-mile loop, and it takes me the first 2 miles before I can get through my list of all the things in my mind. But that last mile is like gold because it's the last mile that I feel like, okay, I'm listening. Yeah. I'm listening. Like I can hear the things that are coming, and I'm ready to receive those things, because the first 2 miles I was just like telling, in prayer, like all the things that I needed to work through in my own mind. So that practice for sure.
And you called that prayer, like that hour is a prayer for you mentally, like, because
it's hard. It's hard to define because it isn't.
But it's a conversation that you're having with yourself, and you know that yourself is included in the Holy Spirit is in you because you've accepted that. Right. So that practice, we had Steve Kick on, was one of our first, and he talked a lot about grounding and being in nature and how that allows him that clarity, right? So you're kind of saying the same thing in a way, that like a practice of that hour walk outside allows for alignment mentally to have a conversation with yourself, which ultimately is a conversation with God.
Yeah. And it's intentionally listening. So just finding downtime, finding quiet, finding moments where I can just be like, okay. And of course, your own thoughts are like constantly coming in. So when you talk about your perspective and life plan, that I told you all these things, I don't remember any of those things. I don't remember any of those words.
Yeah.
In my mind, it was like, Steve just needs some quiet.
Yeah.
And so I was like, fine, I'm just going to take all of his stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm like walking out the door, and you're like, here, take my Apple Watch. Like, you gave me your watch. I was like, oh, I didn't even know you had that. Right.
Yeah. I almost got away with it. But I'm like,
you like threw it at me.
I think it was, if I remember, it was like $3,800 I spent on this plan. I was like, I can't
if I'm
cheat
doing it, I'm going to do it.
I can't cheat it anymore.
But it was it was like, man, he could really use some quiet.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just because that's so valuable for me, right? And I love to journal, and I've gotten into and out of practices over time. And so just writing out and like showing gratitude of all of the things, because I really, holding loosely again for me is a recognition that I am not in control. I did not create my own self. Like, even though my mom and dad are my mom and dad, like there's a higher power that made that happen and created me as me. And so I need to do my part in that, or I want to do my part in that, to recognize like, who am I and what does he have for me? Because this is his. Same thing with our finances. I'm like, okay, great. Like, what do you want us to do with this? Like, how can we utilize these pieces that you've entrusted us with in order to serve others? And so it's just a mindset and a continual practice of.
Yeah. I think of it as when you're singing praise and worship songs, either at church or just, in your car or whatever, it's very hard to be gripping during that, right? Like, why do people put their hands out or put their hands up? And it's obviously for worshiping, but I ultimately always think of that as like, oh, I can't grip on to me anymore in this conversation that I'm having in singing this song.
Yep.
And
you put your focus elsewhere.
Right. Yeah. So tell me about, we have probably like 10 or 15 minutes. We have like 15 minutes left. And I think you have a very unique perspective, and I'd like you to speak into it, is being a female entrepreneur with a husband that's an entrepreneur, and then raising 2 boys, right? And having all these practices. Ellen Grace obviously is an entrepreneur and a salesperson in and of herself, and I am too. We're constantly debating time, right? Vesting of, okay, who can do this thing right now, because we both are very busy right now in our lives. So, yesterday was me picking up the Little Caesars, even though it's not healthy at all, but that's what the kids will eat, right? So
that's the reality of your day.
That's the reality of the day, right? And for her, it was like the biggest blessing ever, right? It was like,
sure.
you're gonna, and the kids will be happy, and I can't right now, right? Help the mother, wife, entrepreneur, business person, growth minded. Because I think a lot of the people that are listening are that. When I look at the analytics, there's a lot of mid-30s, early 40s females that are watching. And then there's a lot of dudes that are watching as well that are of that mindset of growth and growing. How do they balance? In the 2025 world that we're, I've gotten 4 phone calls since we've been here. Right. It doesn't stop. How do you figure out those seasons of life to say, like, I'm mom today, or I'm like, I don't think you can choose, right? You're always mom. You're always right. But there's a lot of guilt on the dad side, on the mom side, on trying to be all things.
So this is where I go into, like, part of my mission is that I'm a challenger. And so what I would say is, do you have to do all of those things? Because
who's telling you, right? Like, who's telling you have to do all of it?
Who's telling you that you have to do all the things? Because you determine what should be on your plate. And you determine what needs to be on your plate, and you determine how that time is spent. Can I give a book recommendation?
Yeah, please. You do.
So Patrick Lencioni.
Yeah.
The 3 Big Questions for a Frantic Family.
Okay.
3 Big Questions for the Frantic Family. It's a fable, super easy read.
Great. That's what I need.
Yep. Really fun, easy. The premise of the book is basically like the dad is out running his business, mom is at home, and they get head on because he says, man, if I ran my business the way you run this home, you don't say that. Okay. But that is the premise.
We're already in counseling. We started and we're going to keep on with it, but boy, that would be some work, huh?
That is the premise, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but what do we actually want as a family? So it's almost creating a life plan for your family. And it's putting together, like, what are these things that we find important? Like, are all these things of equal importance? And in certain seasons, what do we need to lean into? What are we letting go of? Who do we actually have to stand up to their expectations? And ultimately, like, you decide that. And so I think Matt and I, first of all, let me say, I have the greatest life partner. Like, he is such a gift. I am a working mom. I do not grocery shop. I do not cook. There's a lot of things that I don't do. We hire somebody to clean our house, not excessively, like once a month.
No, but even if it's once a week, that's not wrong, right?
No, it's not wrong.
So I want to make clear, because you just
I'm also cheap. No, I'm also cheap.
You tried to justify that it was only, like, don't, like, no, because Ellen Grace says this all the time when she's meeting with, like, other females, and I've always been like, and she's gotten on me because a couple times I'm like, we don't really have the money, and she's like, no, Steve, like, this is critical. Like, we have someone clean the house every 2 weeks. We have a nanny, obviously, to help with some of the kids, and they do the laundry, and I've always done my own laundry, so I'm like, why are they doing my underwear? But anyways, that's a different subject. But but she always says to anybody she meets with is like, wait a minute, like, think about your life. And if I call you today and say, hey, I need you to come clean my house and I'll pay you $15 an hour, would you come clean my house? And they'd say, like, no, absolutely not. Then why, when you're this stressed, are you cleaning yours? That's not your highest and best.
Or you're not. And then you're stressed about it because
it's a mess.
Every moment you're looking at all the things that are out of place.
I'm probably not the healthiest specimen, because I love the smell of the chemicals when I walk in after the cleaning is done. When you walk in that Tuesday after work and you smell all the chemicals, you're like, oh,
it's clean.
It's clean.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. There is something to be said about, like, it is done. Like, once a month, it is clean. Because what I would do And we've pretty much always invested in somebody cleaning the house. This isn't a new thing to us. But what I would be like, oh, I'll clean this today and it's never clean all at once.
Yeah.
And so I'm just not great at it anyway. And so, yeah, we do that. Like we have other people that help with things, but we don't do a lot also. And so we have things that we know are priorities. We know that we're building, we know that we're working on and where we want to put our energy, but there's a lot that we don't do. Now, we also are homeschoolers. And so that makes it a lot easier. Okay. Because I recognize that whichever system you're in, there's a lot of expectations and there's a lot of thoughts around what that should be. And so if your kids are in sports, that adds a whole nother level. If they're in all these different activities, like it adds a whole, and then you got a whole bunch of them, it just adds a lot. Whereas like for us, we can keep it pretty streamlined and simplified because at the end of the day, like my kids don't know. Like they don't know what that spin looks like. I mean, they have friends that are in different scenarios for sure than them. But they're not missing out on a lot of things because they don't know that system of crazy exists. So I would say like what is important to us. And then it's important for every family to say, because if you don't determine what's important to us and where we want to spend our time, everybody else will tell you where it needs to be spent.
Yes.
And then you fall into that and then you're just reacting. And if this didn't make it clear enough, I'm very much of the proactive mindset versus the reactive.
Yeah. Because I think of all the sports that our kids could be in and I'm like, no, like, I love you. And I want to see you do well and everything. But you know what? The City Rec League really soccer program is all you need. Like, have fun, kick the ball. Like, I don't need you to be in Premier, whatever. Like, you're not like, I love you, but I don't see the college. Like, maybe, but like that doesn't align with what our values are right now. And so I'm sorry that, yes, could you be an all-star soccer player if you got all that training? But like, then you're going to lose out on so much other things, or our family will lose out because we're focused on those things.
But then it also gives you space to allow them to explore other things. So for example, my younger son has been really into baking and he just has been baking bread, which is delicious. I'm like, how did I live without fresh baked bread? Because now every week I'm like, we're out again. Can you make us some more? He's like, and he'll make it. But he has the time. He has the time, he has the space to do that. And so we are very, very intentional about like, what are the things that they are interested in and how can they get some of that real world experience now? Because then they can start figuring out like this worked, this didn't. I was excited about this. I wasn't excited about that.
But I think your value aligns in that. I think of Kelly Dykstra, who worked for me. She was my best assistant, and I always beg her once a year, like, "Are you sure you don't want to come back and work for me?" But now she's so good that she gets paid ridiculous money, so she's very successful. But all growing up, her boys were in every soccer program, and now. One's at Cornerstone playing and one's at Davenport or just graduating. And they still go to all the soccer games
which
for
is
the kids.
Awesome.
Right?
It's a community.
And but it was so like, she would tell me all the travel they're doing and stuff, but it was so aligned with what her and her husband wanted and 100%. Their kids wanted. And I was like, yeah, that works for you because that aligns with your family
because
goals.
You intentionally made that decision.
Right.
You're not reactively making that decision because of all the elements around you.
And you're choosing then other things that you're not going to do because you're focused on that, right? Instead of the guilt of, oh, I should do these other 10 things, right? And so how is that practice for you and Matt to go through that aligning? Is that a constant conversation or is that a once a year where you guys go away and say, does this align?
No, we don't have a lot of those practices. I mean, I think we have always been really uniquely aligned in just our mindset. And I think we've grown in similar ways around this, around our family and what we want that to look like. The early days. So Journey Academy is an acting academy. There's a lot of them all around the world. And so the mindset of that model is one that both of us ascribed to really early on. And the Lencioni book was one of the ones that they recommended early on. And so I think we both just kind of have that as a guidepost that we can make decisions around. We both choose, like, we don't really want to live busy all the time. Like, we want to have the time that we spend be intentional. So we choose, and you can be intentional and busy. I'm not saying that these are on the opposite ends of the spectrum, but our intentionality is less busy. But you can do it either way. Again, like you said,
as long as it aligns.
Yeah, like you said with your podcast, that it's actually helping to encourage all those other places and bringing energy to all the other things that you're doing because you have that outlet. And we just kind of try and keep that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So, those that are struggling at home, trying to find alignment between the husband wife of this sort of mindset, right? Of like, hey, I think we should go here. I think that there's a lot of that struggle of like, well, my values don't always align with your values, right? And so how can this study, or how does the study practice of learning more about yourself help then in that alignment within?
Well, it gives
the couple?
you the words.
The words.
I mean, Matt and I just had a conversation this last weekend, and it started off as an argument. And then he said something that was like mind blowing to me. And I'm like, oh, I get it now. Like, it just was like so clear to me that I was trying to hold an expectation on something that was really important to me. And he's just wired differently. And so it came through in a frustration, but we both had the opportunity to like reflect on that and say like, okay, maybe the expectation is different, but you both have to be committed to that.
Yeah.
I think you can't control whether the other person is committed to that or not, but what you can control is your own self and knowing and understanding your own self. And so then what you can do as you learn your own self, it gives you words to speak to what you're feeling and what you're working through. And again, they can decide whether or not they're going to react to the things that you know to be true, because you are in control of another person's reaction. But I do think it gives you that peace of mind to at least know, like, I know where this is coming from.
Right. Yeah. When you, Ellen Grace and I, because of the trauma of our childhood and everything, she has it on her side and I have my own stuff. It's amazing, like, when you have the verbiage and you're in a partnership that allows the verbiage to play out of like, why did we just react in a negative way to each other? And then it's really easy to be like, okay, my reaction is based on this history, this lens, and you saw it this way. Oh, it's not really a disagreement. It's just a misunderstanding based on our lenses that we're seeing this thing through, right? We had that conversation just yesterday when she was texting, and then we had a conversation where, you know, a kid has to have a medical procedure, and I said, hey, you know, we're better off doing it because she just changed her job, and we're better off using the COBRA insurance that we have because it's cheaper. So let's get it done. And then there was confusion on which parent would have rights during that time with her ex. And she's like, I would pay $5,000 or $10,000 just to be in the room to do it. And I was like, that makes no sense to me. Like, I love the child, but like $5,000's a lot of money. You know, like we could, you know, and I, it was interesting. I said, like, would you prefer not to go to spring break to be in the room? And she said, yeah, I would go in the room all day long over spring break for any of our children. And I'm like, I like, and so that it's a clarifying, because I would be like, well, think of all the adventures. What are they going to remember? You in the room.
But you also had the sense to ask that question,
right?
And
give
it's
her
words. A choice,
right,
to react to it. And you're like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah. And even that question allowed for an understanding on how important, because I'm like, I don't like, I get the money importance, but like, wow, you're willing to give up an experience for this experience, right? And I'm like, okay. And we worked it out because it allowed me to then sit in it for a minute and be like, okay, it's that vitally important to her that I actually have to sit in this conversation to figure it out now, right? I can't just say, no, this is how we're going to do it, right? Because it's like, wait a minute, like, whew, okay, that's that critical for you. But without understanding each other's lenses on the spousal side or the employee side, you name it. And I think that's really the goal for the podcast, is to remind people that like the person across the table from you is so different, even though you think you know them. Right. I think I really know Ellen Grace well now. I have lots to learn, but I generally understand her history, her lenses and everything. But I didn't understand it to that point,
Yeah.
right? Because
I
my
mean, Matt
lens,
and I have been married for almost 17 years, and this was 3 days ago.
right? Yeah. So I think that lens idea, or having words also allows for the grace to occur, right?
Yeah.
Like that, it's like, okay, I can now give grace to the other person because I get them more.
Yeah.
And if I get them more, then I can remove myself from that conversation, right?
Yeah.
And I think our faith really is that of the forgiveness of our sins ultimately was grace given to us. And so
Right.
how do we proceed then to give grace
Right.
back without like asking questions, knowing words, or understanding ourselves first and then the other person?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Ultimately. We probably should wrap it up. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to speak on
This is helpful and so fun. I mean, it's fun for me to think through and to also like recognize your experience.
Yeah.
And I think, to leave people with, because one of the tools that we do go through is what is in my control and what's not in my control.
Yeah.
And I do think it's important in any situation, whether things are going well or they're hard or whatever, you do need to recognize like what is within my control and what's not. And one thing that is within your control is knowing yourself.
Yeah, you.
And so if that is something that you're like, hey, I need answers and I want to understand where I'm going, like follow that. And I'm not saying that it has to be a life plan. I'm not saying that this is the right process, but like take time. I mean, there's no better invested time, right? And just really understanding yourself and how you are uniquely wired, and then what that means in service to the world, because I think it brings great fulfillment and joy. And so I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you for coming. Yeah, anybody that wants to reach out to you or to me, please do so, obviously on all the social medias, or you can just hit us up. But I know you're not going to do a lot of these, or you don't want to, but you might get busy. But I know that you can refer them to other people too. If there's too many of people that want this.
Might just be a few months away.
Yeah, and that's okay. It's worth waiting for. But I think what I've learned from you today is the continuation of I'm in control of myself, and in control of myself, I need the verbiage to own me. And that's what you gave me 6 years ago. I think that you don't necessarily need a Dana to do that. I needed that, right? And other people might. But just going on that walk, getting grounded, and taking a notepad to sit with yourself, which isn't fun typically to sit with yourself, right? To actually write out, this is where I've come from. Here is the lenses I have used and have grown. Are they the cape I want to wear still?
Yeah.
Or should I release that in order to move into the healthy me with the words that fit who I am? So,
and once I know them and I have clarity around it, how do I stand in a posture of surrender and recognition of, let's do this, right? And just recognizing what comes your way.
Yeah.
Not right away. It never happens right away, but I can say, 9 years later, 6 years later, it looks different than it did back at that time.
Yeah. Thank you for spending the time with us.
You.
Thank you all
Thanks, Paul.
for listening. Yeah. And thanks, Paul. Paul's going to get on the podcast soon.
Just
so we know. Yeah. Yeah. He said he's not a podcaster, but then he subscribed to the podcast, and then I got to see all of his podcasts that he's done. So he's kind of fibbing. Yeah. He's kind of fibbing. But yeah. So anyways, thank you for joining us. This is I'm Just Steve, the podcast, and we're out. Thanks, folks.